Hi everybody, I'm Don Dickson and I want to welcome you to another edition of our structure fishing workshop. We've been talking about structure, breaks, and break lines in particular. We're going to close and conclude that discussion today by talking about contact points. So today we're going to further define what a contact point is. Contact point is simply the very first spot that the fish hit on their movement and migration towards the shallows. It's where they first make contact with a structure. And this contact point, it will always be at the exact same spot. Now, how are the fish going to determine that contact point? As I mentioned to you many times before, a fish can take in 5 times more light with their eyes than we do. So a fish can see that light change easily. He has no trouble seeing that break line. So they can readily see a break line. They can identify it, see it, and they can move right to it. Now, if the drop-off break line is the first spot they hit, and we say they're going to hit it at the same spot each and every time, how do we identify where that spot is? How does a fish identify the spot? Keep in mind now, we're pretending for a minute you're the fish. You look up, you see that beautiful light change, you identify a break line. You don't know what it is, but you can see it, you identify with it instinctively. But how can you hit it at exactly the same spot all the time? Because it all looks the same. When we were talking about break lines, we said most of them run for quite a distance, run for a long distance. So if it all looks the same to the fish, where the heck are they going to hit it? And how are they going to identify that spot, the same exact spot tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after, and the year after? Because there has to be an additional spot on that break line that breaks up the uniformity of that break line and gives them that spot to hit. And that's what we call the contact point, a break on the break line. So when the fish begin to move and make their migration, what's the very first thing they're going to head for? They're going to head for that break line drop-off, the final drop-off into deep water. But exactly where? It's going to be on that break line. Something that's different. And it's got to be the first thing they see. As they move out of their sanctuary to the break line, the very first break they see on that break line is where they're going to make contact. This little diagram we're showing here with a bunch of different breaks on it, we're showing that as a drop-off. Regardless of what the depth is, it's the drop-off to your deep water hole in your lake, it's the drop-off to the channel in your reservoir, but it is representing a drop-off. Now, the question before us is, when the fish move out of their deep water sanctuary and hit this drop-off break line, the most important break line we have in fishing, if it all looks the same, where are they going to head? They're going to head for a break. We know it's always going to be a break. Now, in different kind of lakes and different kind of reservoirs, there'll be some that are more likely to be found, and there's some that's not going to be found. You're not going to find cut-off stumps in a natural lake. It doesn't exist. You'll find them in a reservoir, but not natural lake. So just use your common sense on a lot of this, but this represents, no matter where you're fishing, these are the things that will break up the uniformity of that drop-off, and the very first thing the fish sees on his movement to that drop-off, wherever that first break is and what it is and where it exists, that's the contact point. It's important that we know that contact point. Remember, in many of our discussions, I talked about Buck drilling his finger in the water. That's what he was pointing at, the contact point. And as we talk in mapping interpretation, we'll get more detailed on it, but keep in mind, when a fish moves, when you're looking for that contact point, it's the first break that exists on that final break line drop-off into the deep water or to the channel. First break on that break line. Here's what it could be by looking at the diagram. Could be a finger. First thing we're looking at here. Could be a bar that reaches all the way out to that and has a nice point on the end of that thing and drops right into the channel. Now that next spot we're showing there is where we have a little cut pocket that goes back in off of that channel brake line. Now in our discussion on weed lines, I showed that, you know, we had a finger, but then we had a cut back that creates a little pocket. That's what I'm showing here. Now anytime you have a little pocket like that on a brake line, you'll have the points on both sides of that little cut back in that could in fact be a contact point. Important spot, breaking up the uniformity of the structure. And the next section we see, there's a rock pile. Again, something that's different on that brake line. And the rock pile certainly is different. Next thing we're showing is a hump. That's different. And all of these breaks are possibilities for a contact point on your brake line, on your drop-off, in your fishing situation. Now the next area we show there is a clean spot. We even gave an example of that the last time we talked about Danny and I down in Texas, catching unlimited fish in that one clean area. That's all there was in the entire lake. Next we have a stump. In your reservoir, you're going to have stumps. You know, and if you can't see them on your depth sounder, you're going to find them with your lure. And after that, the very next thing we see is a sharper break. Now, I've talked over and over and over and over about the importance of the sharper break and how Buck felt about sharper breaks and how I felt about sharper breaks. So I hope you get the same idea. I'm always looking for a sharper break. If I find a big old bar, it's got 6 big old fingers on it, I'm looking for a bunch of things, but one of the things I'm really interested in is finding one of those fingers have a sharper break. Next, we're showing a bush. But just say now, I want you to be thinking like the fish. We got this brake line, it all looks the same. And all of a sudden, there's a big old bush sitting right on it. Contact point. And in some cases, Buck used to always talk about this sort of jokingly, but it's true. We've found them before. Sunken boat. Somebody sunk a boat right down there, right on the brake line. That's a break on a brake line. If that's all there was, a brake line and nothing else, and all of a sudden there's a sunken boat. It's 50 years old. There's your contact point. And until it rots away, it'll remain the contact point. As we conclude this, I want you to just always keep in mind that that contact point is going to be a break on the brake line. Now, you have all these different possibilities. And in some cases, people will ask, well, I fish reservoirs. What am I looking for? Or I fish just natural lakes. What am I looking for? Well, we can say in a natural lake, the most predominant breaks that you're going to find will be the end of the bar. You're going to have sharper breaks. You know how we feel about them. You're going to have humps. And you're going to have fingers. Remember we talked about brake line running, all of a sudden changes directions and creates a finger. Or you can call it a mini bar. But these will be the 4 main types of breaks that you will find in a natural lake. Now if you're fishing reservoirs, there can be some additional things that don't exist in a natural lake. But so if you're just fishing 1 or 2 lakes, you know, you can figure out what the most likely break you're going to run into, whether it's a natural lake or a reservoir, or what combination of breaks you're going to be running into. However, I can tell you that most every time you catch a fish, it's going to be on a break of some sort on a brake line. So a lot of times guys will ask me, which one of these breaks is the best? Well, can't say. Lake types, the bottom conditions, a different type of lake, and all of these things are going to determine which is the most likely that you'll be finding in your lake. But I don't know where you're fishing. So we're going to take a look at if you're fishing a lot of water. You're fishing natural lakes, reservoirs, you're fishing lowlands, flatlands, highlands, you're fishing natural lakes, you're fishing rivers, you're fishing all over the place and a lot of different waters. Then you ask the question, which would be the most important break you think you could be looking for if you're fishing all of these different waters? I'd say all things being considered, I'm looking for the sharper break. Whenever it's breaking the sharpest, that's the most visible to the fish. Now keep in mind, you can have end of the bar, you can have fingers, you can have some of these other, what we call breaks on a brake line that also you're going to have to add in there that one breaks sharper than the other. One finger breaks sharper than the other finger. The one with the sharpest break is going to be the spot. So if you're fishing a lot of different waters, do yourself a favor, acquaint yourself with sharper breaks. So as you know, we talked a little bit about presentation. We fish from the shallows to the deep. However, what we're talking about today is a contact point. We're going to interpret, we're going to locate the contact point on structure. The first break on the deepest break line, the drop-off break line to the channel or the deep water hole. Once we establish that spot, that's where Buck Perry drills his finger in the water. And that's where I drill mine in the water. There's our fish. Now, if I go to one of my favorite reservoirs or lakes, and I go to my favorite little structure, and there's no fish on it, but the weather looks pretty good and I'm going to wait for the fish, where do you think I'm going to wait? I'm not going to wait up at the weed line. I'm going to wait at the contact point. I know if they start to move, the first thing they got to hit's that contact point. So I'm going to back off, anchor down, and fan cast and be checking that contact point until I get activity. Knowing where the contact point is on structure, that's the separation point to the real structure fishermen and the people that talk about being structure fishermen. Being able to establish that spot, it's going to fill your stringer nearly every time you go fishing. So many times the fish will hit that spot and never move shallower. You live it out because you've identified the spot. That's the beauty of this whole discussion on breaks and break lines and how fish utilize them. They got to be able to see it, and we can see it too. And if we can see it, we can fish it. And if a fish even thinks about sticking his head up, you and I are going to catch him. We're going to catch that rascal because we're at the same spot he is. And I appreciate you being here with me today. So I ask you one more time as we conclude this discussion, if you'll like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. See you the next time.